We'll now introduce Lesson 36, the third hey verbs. Most verbs that end with hey were originally third yod verbs or third vav verbs. And three pieces of evidence point to this conclusion. One, the final hey represents a vowel, that is a mater, and not a consonant. Two, yod appears in many of the forms as a quiescent letter. And three, many of these verbs are spelled in cognate languages with the final yod. Because all third hey verbs follow predictable patterns, a survey of the basic forms and rules will help in understanding the paradigms. The basic and simplest forms of third hey verbs will behave as follows. A third masculine singular perfect will end with kamatz hey, as in bana, he built. The imperfect of a third hey verb will, in the third masculine singular, will end with a segol hey, as in yivneh, he will build. The imperative will end in sereh hey, as in the imperative beneh. An active participle will end in segol hey, as in boneh. And the passive participle will have a yod, the original yod of the root. As we said, that these were originally third yod verbs. If you look at it that way, then the form benui, with a y at the end, with a yod at the end, is actually regular. The irregular ones are all the ones that have the phony hey that's not originally part of the root. The infinitive construct of these verbs will end, interestingly, with an ot. So to build is benot, or with preposition la, benot. But instead of getting the form that you would expect, you end up with an ot ending. And then the infinitive absolute is actually more or less regular, beno. Now, when you start adding endings onto these basic forms, you end up with the hey going away. So if you look at the perfect third common plural, you have bana, but then you add the u ending. And the form you end up getting when the hey goes away is benu. Now, if you posit that the original root was a bet nun yod, it would originally have been a ba-nayu, but they simplified that to benu. Same thing with the imperfect. The segol hey goes away and you get yivnu, they will build. The imperative, same thing. You get benu, build, speaking to a group of guys. And then the active participle, boneh, you'll drop the segol hey ending, which is, by the way, true also of nouns that end in segol hey. You'll drop the segol hey ending and add your plural ending, hirich yod mem, if it's masculine plural, and you'll get bonim, or if it were feminine plural, it would end up being bonot. Bonot, I should say, bonot. And then the active participle, cal-active participle, feminine singular, you add a kamatz hey, but before you add that, you drop the segol hey, add the kamatz hey, and you get bona, she who builds. Now, in some of the derived forms, the yod does come back, though it is quiescent, it appears as a vowel letter. So in the perfect second masculine singular, when you add the ta ending, you get a bonita. So it sounds like we're speaking Spanish. But anyway, bonita, the yod of the original root does come back. Also in the imperfect, you get tivnena, with the second feminine plural and also third feminine plural. And then Likewise, in the imperative, you'll add the na ending, but then the original yod comes back, and you'll get a banena. And then the active participle, the yod, will come back in the feminine singular form, and you may get a boniya. At least in some cases, you'll get the yod coming back, and that would be regular, more or less, if you posit that the root is benai with a yod at the end. So that leads us to the overall paradigm. Another factor that comes into play, or another peculiarity, shall we say, is in the third feminine singular perfect, where you end up with a T. So instead of getting a ban ya or something like that, which is what you might expect, what you end up with is a ban ta. And as Ross says, the third feminine singular form has a T. This T is probably an old feminine ending that remained with the verb after the feminine ending kamatse was added. And apart from this, the T spelling follows the regular verb, but in any case, you do get that. And then the second masculine singular in the perfect, you get a bonita, as we said. You will not get the dog-ish in the ta because it's preceded by a vowel, as he points out in the footnote. And notice the yod shows up in many of the forms. And then in the imperfect, the yod shows up in the third feminine plural and then the second feminine plural, which are both identical forms. Otherwise, usually when you add endings, the segol he of the third masculine singular goes away, and you just place it over the noon that remains. The imperative would be similar to the second person when you drop the T. So if you have tivne, drop the T, you get bene, except it goes from a segol to a sere would be the only difference. Otherwise, it does follow that pattern. Same thing in the second masculine plural, tivnu, drop the T, you get tenu, benu, and benu is in fact the masculine plural imperatival form. Active participle, there are two forms of the feminine. Either you drop the segol he entirely and you get bona, but sometimes the yod does show up and you get a boniya. So there are two possible forms, biforms. And otherwise you just take the form boneh, drop the segol he, and add your either feminine or singular, feminine plural, or masculine plural endings. Passive participle, benui is the masculine singular form. Otherwise, you just add feminine endings or masculine plural endings to that. And then the infinitive construct has an ot ending, whereas the infinitive absolute looks relatively regular. Now, the caljussive of third he verbs will have a shortened form in which the segol he will go away. And there'll be some adjustments in the spelling for the dropping of that. And let me show you some examples of this. Similar sort of thing happens in the preterite. So if you have patah, to be simple, the imperfect is yifte. But then when you make it vav consecutive, you'll drop the segol he, and you'll get a vayift, and he was simple. With the jussive, if you have he will build, yivneh, you'll drop the segol he, and then you'll do some adjustments. The accent actually will recede, and you'll end up with the jussive not being yivneh, but even. and that would mean let him build. And so unlike the strong verb where the imperfect form and the jussive forms are identical, you can actually tell from the form that a form happens to be a jussive. Another example is with baka, to weep. He will weep is yivke. But if you want to make it jussive, let him weep. Well, you drop the segol hey, but then you adjust the vowels some. And again, this is not totally predictable. But the yod goes to a sere, and you get yivk, let him weep. Or with kala, to be finished, the imperfect would be yikle, he or it will be finished. But then when you make it vav consecutive, you drop your segol hey, and what's left ends up behaving like a siglet noun. You get a vayekel, and it was finished. So the four types of shortened forms appear in both cal preterite and cal jussive, and this chart shows you what we've just gone over. Except I note that this is an error here. That should be a noon with a segol under it here rather than a vav. Moving on to the cal coordinative for third hays. The cal coordinative of third hays do not have the ending kamatz hey that normally marks coordinatives. That's because the form already has a hey at the end. And so rather than adding a kamatz hey, it just spells it identically. So the I will build and let me build is going to be identical for a third hay type verb. When you add pronominal suffixes on the third hay verbs, it'll follow the same rule as the regular verb when adding suffixes to the perfect, the imperfect, or the imperative. However, a final stem vowel, kamatz hey, segol hey, sere hey, is not retained when adding a pronominal suffix. So, for example, here you have baniti, I built, and then you could add a who, and you get a banitihu, I built it. But if you have yivneh with a segol hey, and you want to add the who, you'll get a yivnehu, and basically the hey that you see in the regular imperfect form disappears, and you just get the hey of the suffix that appears. And same thing with beneh, build, as a command, plus aim, them, and the mem will supplant the hey, and you'll get bename, build them. Now the endings of unaffected third hay verbs and the rules that apply to forms with verbal suffixes are the same for all stems. In some forms in the derived stems, the vowel before a verbal consonant infix may be sere yod instead of hirik yod, but the signs critical for recognizing each verbal form remains unchanged. And so here he gives you gala in various nifal, pial, pual, hithpael, hifil, and hafal. And you can see how these work. Occasionally it goes to an e vowel, as you can see. But recognizing them is not, frankly, all that difficult. And we'll finish this in the next video.